In 2016, we introduced the KTM 1290 Super Duke GT. And this is the most recent iteration of that. But how do we take it to the next level of what is already the most extreme sports tourer available on the market today? Well, it's quite easy. We introduce the KTM 1390 Super Duke GT. To help me introduce this model to you today, we've got the official chief engineer of the KTM 1390 Super Duke GT, Wolfgang Tenz. Welcome and thank you for joining.
Thank you very much.
Wolfgang, before we jump into what actually makes this motorcycle all new for us actually, and a complete new generation for GT lovers globally, quick information for myself and some of the viewers. How long does it actually take to put something like this in a shape that we see today?
Basically, if you're talking about a new gen like this is, I would say around about 3 years, possibly a little bit more. But yeah, and overall, with all this development and pre-development issues, I would say 3 years, yeah.
And with that involved, I mean, you've got quite a big team. So obviously 3 years, it's not an overnight project or overnight success. There's a lot of similarities, of course, with Super Duke. And with this model specifically, it's actually the biggest jump forward that we see with the GT, which is quite exciting and something we'll dive into a little bit later. But how much of your research and development is done in Austria?
Basically 100% here in Austria, in the R&D department in Mattighofen.
The subframe is now obviously quite a visual appealing element to the motorcycle, very different to the old 1290 Super Duke GT, but it's not the same as the Super Duke R subframe, isn't it?
Correct. We did develop the new cast aluminum subframe, where we can handle the extra load for the luggage system and also for pillion riding. It gives perfect comfort for both riders and pillion rider. It is a great update in comparison to the old one, and also it's much different to the Super Duke subframe for sure.
We've got an all-new dashboard for this model that we don't actually find on any of our other products.
Correct. The new dashboard will be introduced with the model year 25. So in general, we do have a completely new E-architecture in the bike. Part of it would be the dash for sure. We have here this widescreen dash with touch screen functionality. Quite easy to use also when riding. And we will also have quite cool on-map navigation within the dashboard, where we can also use offline maps if we want to get lost somewhere. Also, with the update of 25, we will have the completely new KTM-developed switch cubes, which would make it quite easy to navigate through all the dashboard software, where you can adjust, as you will see afterwards, quite a lot.
What I like actually was your introduction of a dedicated mode button, so that you can get to the mode screen super quick in one click, which is essential. Also on the dashboard, you can get to the mode screen in one click as well. You can simply touch what mode you're in and it brings up the mode screen. And like you do on any mobile phone, you can scroll up and find your ultimate setting for there. But on the left side, we have quite an advanced joystick setup that we've introduced along with the pedal. So what do we use the joystick and what do we use the pedal shift for?
So joystick is clear just for the navigation through the dashboard and all functions of it. And here with the up and down pedals, we are able to modify it, so you can have the preloaded hook to it or the slip level in track mode. So yeah, there are a few functions which you can then set it on, and you can then customize it as you wish.
Every motorcycle comes with a variety of ride modes. Let's deep dive into what ride modes we have on the GT, because for this model specifically, we don't have your traditional setup that we've always had on models previous to this. Maybe take us through the variety of ride modes our riders have to enjoy on this bike.
We do have 4 main ride modes. So we have as normal street, sport, rain and track. And we would also have 3 additional fully customizable ride modes where you can set whatever preferences you have. So that's quite a big benefit for the customer there.
Sticking into electronics, we have a radar fitted to the front of the motorcycle, which allows the rider to access the adaptive cruise control. Maybe take us through a little bit of exactly what that means for a rider. What accessibility do they have on the ACC?
With the new generation of the radar sensor, which is fitted to the front of the bike, we have the function of the adaptive cruise control, which means I can adjust to comfort, where you have quite a big distance, where it regulates quite calmly. Then you have sport, where it's a little bit more aggressive, where you have a little bit more punch in the acceleration, also in the deceleration. Then you have a group ride, so it recognizes the bikes in front and besides you. And then you can also adapt the distances where you want to have your bike in there. And it's an awesome feature if you're traveling quite far distances, for example, highway roads where you just don't want to focus too much. So it's a quite cool feature, and it's a quite comfortable feature there, and it works quite well.
And fitted to the same piece of kit on the front, we also have a distance control, which is not essentially adaptive cruise control, but the distance control works somewhat slightly different, but without activating a cruise control.
Correct. You're still accelerating and driving in the same way as you did and as you always do, but you basically introduce a safety net. So if you are accelerating too much to a standing object, or also on the highway again, and you run into a slower car, it will then automatically decelerate you in a quite comfortable manner. Yeah.
If we look at the front screen on the motorcycle, it's quite a lot wider than what the predecessor was. What have we done different from the old model to this one?
So we have here the same windshield mechanism as we had before. So you can push forward, push it up, and you have the screen up and down position. The screen is much wider than we had before, which offers a way better protection over the whole rider, especially over the shoulders. Also interesting here is that we have this hole in the middle, which is benefiting the rider for buffeting or any other noises while riding. So that's basically a comfort feature there, and it's operating quite well.
And I noticed also right by your pull mechanism, you have what looks to be an SP Connect unit. Is that something we're going to have standard fitted to the bike?
Correct. So this will come equipped with every bike. Yeah, easy to use. Just put the phone on there, push down, and the phone is safely connected to the bike.
If we look now, sticking in the front of the motorcycle, we look at the headlight. Now, Wolfie, on this one, the headlight is not actually the same as what we've used on the Super Dukes.
Correct. So this is a totally GT exclusive headlight with the noticeably daytime running lights on the side and the two high and low beams in the middle. So that's GT exclusive.
And I also couldn't help but notice that we look like tucked neatly into the fairing. Are they cornering lights or are they spotlights? What exactly are their purpose?
Absolutely correct. As you said, those are cornering lights. That's the new generation, which will come to the market in 2025. It will be controlled of a new body control unit, which provides a much better performance as we had it in the past.
I couldn't help but notice that we now have a complete steel tank on this motorcycle, where the predecessor was a plastic covered tank. What do we have that's different, and what capacity do we have in this tank?
You're completely right. So we're talking here about a new metal tank, which is also again GT exclusive. We're talking about 19.5 liters of fuel capacity there, which brings you quite far if necessary.
And the shapes of the tank is quite unique, and you know, based on my experience in the past with speaking to a lot of your test riders, this forms quite a crucial part of ergonomics. And there's only one person in particular that I'd like to maybe discuss this with, and that would be nobody else than Jeremy McWilliams. I really thought it valuable to bring a rider's perspective into what some of these technical features mean and how they translate for everyday use. Jeremy, how important is it for us to focus on ergonomics on a motorcycle, and what does this actually mean for a rider who would potentially spend the full day in the saddle?
Well, exactly that. You know, as test riders, we do spend entire days, day on day, in the saddle, and we obviously realize quite quickly what fits and what doesn't, what's comfortable, what's not comfortable, and you know, we have to go between full fuel tanks when we're testing for long distances. The rider ergo triangle is the most important thing. You know, the connection between foot pegs to seat and legs and contact points, making sure that there's nothing that has a high contact point between all the inside of your legs, all the way down to the foot pegs, to the width of the handlebar, the position of the handlebar. And of course, I get asked many times, well, how does that work for a tall rider and a small rider? Well, actually, this motorcycle has to work for both, because as you well know, we have riders, you know, your height right up to our board of directors that are much, much taller.
But another super crucial element to the motorcycle is, of course, suspension, which I think you guys spend a long time and many hours in trying to fine tune. And maybe take us through, on the GT specifically, what type of suspension, let's start with the suspension modes. What type of suspension modes would we have available to the rider? Let's
start with auto standard. It is what it says. It's that 830 millimeter seat height. If we go to auto low, it's about 25% different on auto low as it is in comfort. Same if we go to auto high. It also, you know, we've talked about ergo on the standover position on this bike. So for smaller riders, you know, we find that they can actually touch the ground quite easily in auto standard, but if you so wish, you can lower that by 20 to 25%. Of course, then we delve into all of the additional modes that we have carried over from the Super Duke Evo, whereby with our new semi-active suspension technology, we can give the rider every option that he wants. And I think in simple terms, when we ride in comfort, this is the most comfortable setting, I think, that we all agree that we've ever had on any one of our motorcycles, and it has to be because it's for a touring motorcycle. Of course, you can go to the opposite end of the scale and have it for track, like we had on track here through the video shooting, where we can set track setting and then we can individualize that. So the track setting would be our lead test rider's preferred track setting, as it would be for street, as it would be for comfort. Then if we want to go a little bit deeper, we've got pro settings and we've got favorites. We've got every screen we can store as a favorite, a particular setting that you might prefer at any given track or any given road. The other side of the suspension that we found very useful during testing was that we can go into our pro settings and add or subtract compression and rebound. We have everything in the rear shock that we can add as much compression as you would like, up to maximum, right down to minimum. Same with rebound, same with the front fork, compression and rebound, high speed compression also. And one other thing that we added in was anti-dive. So we can add in anti-dive, and I can talk a little bit more about that if you want, and the reason why we wanted it.
I think one of the biggest questions that we get asked quite often is we can add preload to the rear, but we cannot add preload to the front. However, it kind of offsets itself with this anti-dive function that you've got in some, let's say, small way. But maybe take us through the anti-dive, and why would we put an anti-dive on a motorcycle like this?
So anti-dive basically stops the travel of the motorcycle forward, so it reduces this dive to the front, obviously. And where we really found it useful was with pillion riding. So to stop the pillion pushing onto your back, particularly when we were touring in the Austrian Alps downhill, we found that anti-dive was way more comfortable on than it was off. But we've kept it in so it doesn't make the front of the fork overly stiff. In the past, you know, I noticed that sometimes we could trigger ABS a little bit quicker with anti-dive on, and we've reduced that so that absolutely we don't notice any difference with the anti-dive on and anti-dive off in terms of heavy braking over a particularly bad surface. So this anti-dive is let's say, a lot more rider-friendly than we've had in the past. Sometimes if you want a little bit less dive for very sporty riding, for instance, anti-dive-on's a good thing, or for pillion riding up and down hills, that's where it really comes into its own.
Specific to the GT, this is the first time we see this chassis fitted to this motorcycle, because in the past, the GT was always 2 generations behind, as opposed to the Super Duke. And this is the first time it sees, let's say, the most current chassis. How would a chassis like this give a benefit or feedback to a rider? What would they experience?
This carryover chassis from the Super Duke was, I think, all important because it changed its character quite significantly whenever you're comparing to our older GT model. And I mean, in a way that was much more positive. The feedback that we got from all of our riders that first rode this before we even delved into suspension and finding those little niche products, or parts that we've added to it. I think everybody agreed the first time they rode it that, wow, the chassis really works for this once we put this ergo in it. For me, being the lead test rider on this motorcycle, I can't speak highly enough about it because I really prefer to ride this at the moment over anything else because it offers me every optional extra that I've never had at my fingertips before. So the chassis works incredibly well with it. The new suspension technology is by far ahead of anything we've ever had before. And the range that it gives us is much wider than we've ever had before. So everything from somebody who wants to, just poodle along on a very uncomfortable road to taking this bike to the track. It's so versatile now. And I think a lot of that comes from using this DNA in this chassis. And of course, all of the geometry that we found that works so well with the Super Duke.
Something that also has been working well for quite a long time is the power plant, or power pack as we call it internally, the engine. How would this engine or the owner of this motorcycle in the future enjoy this power plant?
Well, you can tell by the smile on my face, I guess, but that was the most fun part, was introducing this engine to the GT. And I have to say that it's an incredible motor. Of course, you can ride this motorcycle in whatever way you want to, from the very sedate type riding to a much more sportier type approach, if you so wish. And I guess that would be, my way of riding. But also during the development of this motorcycle, we had to take into consideration every level of rider and how they might approach this platform and what might make them want to ride a GT. I guess the biggest thing to me is camshift and what that brings to the party, because it gives that feeling of an incredible performance to the rider if he so wants to experience that. And I think that's what we've got with the 1390 and the camshift is now that it encompasses all of those things that you want in a motorcycle. And riding around the track here, which I never thought I would even consider riding a GT on a track, but we see a lot of our customers do. They take it onto the track, and why not give them every optional extra to use it on the track? And that's kind of what the 1390 is all about. You put it on the track like we do with the Super Duke. This bike is still absolutely as capable as the Super Duke is, which makes it a lot of fun.
Under the bare bones is, of course, the true DNA of what a Super Duke R really is. We've seen publications all around the world refer to the Super Duke as the torque beast, and of course this is referred to as the long distance beast, which is really testament to what it is. But with all of that power, you need to stop the motorcycle somehow, and of course quite a big step forward from the previous generation Super Duke GT with the Brembo M50 setup on it. But not only that, we've changed to the Stellemas, but we've also given the riders some options with the MCS Master Cylinder now. Maybe take us through, we talk about 3 ratios, 19, 20 and 21. When they choose their ratio, what would this actually mean for a rider?
So easy. Every rider has got his preference on how direct he wants the response of the brake to be. So the 3 ratios are in there for that reason. And I guess, you know, the rider who is used to those very, very high level stopping, you know, brakes like Brembo's dilemmas that we're using at the moment, would choose to go to the strongest, the number being 21, I think, in this case. And somebody who doesn't want to have that initial bite just as strong for riding on the street can choose one of the other 2 options.
Sticking into all the stopping power, also connected to the road, are the new tire options or choice that we've gone with. You mentioned a story which I'd like you to explain to the audience is how and what goes into deciding what tires fitted to a motorcycle, and how does that process start?
How long have we got? It takes some time to go through all the options that we have. You know, the tire that we put on this motorcycle has to have such a wide range of working in cold temperatures up to very wet, you know, flooded road conditions. Stopping distances in the wet, acceleration distance, or acceleration with less traction cutting is important, but also really importantly for us is got to be so comfortable. So there's a lot of comfort aspects that we look for in the tire, and then also we have to check it for high-speed stability by loading it with 2 people and full of luggage, and then inputting some very strange movements to make sure that we have a completely stable tire in all scenarios. So at the end of the day, yes, we want to have performance. We look for performance as well, something that at least somebody who wants to ride sportily will have a lot of trust in the tire. And that's what we got with the new Michelin Power 6s. And I'm very, very happy with the performance of them, because we've been riding on the street all the way through the testing of this motorcycle in all kinds of conditions. And one of the other, you know, important features is that it's got longevity. It's got a lot of distance in the tire. So there's tons of things. We don't want self-steering. We don't want the bike to drop in. When the tire wears a little bit, we don't want to feel that there's a step in it. So there's a lot of those considerations that we have to take into account, and I think we got the best.
And I think one of the benefits was also losing 1.5 kilograms of weight. Somewhat saving a little bit of weight. We still need to control the motor that is known as the Beast. Let's dive into a little bit of the ride modes and some of the functions in these ride modes. Anti-wheelie, just like the Super Duke R, we introduced the 5-level anti-wheelie. This has the same setup?
Same setup exactly, Gareth, because, you know, it's a safety feature. It's there because we have got such a high torque number, and if somebody decides to run it on track throttle, reducing all of the rider aids sufficiently, then of course the advice would be use anti-wheelie mode. And anti-wheelie mode basically uses 5 different levels, from low, very low, to low, medium, high, and very high, where it's got a non-flip over function to stop the rider from getting too high during wheelie, which it's a lovely addition. It's something that, you know, I use also on street, and the reason why I use it is because if I'm riding on a sporty back road, I want to keep both wheels in contact. If I'm riding on track for my fastest lap time, I might use low or very low, and again just allowing a little bit of wheelie, a little bit like the technology that we use in MotoGP. The motorcycles are using exactly the same technology, only allowing so much wheelie. Same with the traction control. When you buy the track pack, it's obviously from 10 right down to 0 and all on the fly right now. So as we go through all of those settings, we can reduce the traction control right to off if we want to, when we keep going on our toggle buttons on the left-hand bar.
One thing I love about the toggle switches on the left handlebar, obviously they're configurable as we've spoken about earlier, but there's no long press to turn the stuff off anymore. Once you go through the traction control and you get to 1 and you press down to 0, it's a single press and it goes to 0. You can also do this while on the move, which is really important, because the last thing you need to do is to stop to change something. I think this is also why on the electronics side we've got a couple of options of how to change your riding mode. So we have on the left-hand handlebar, we've got a toggle switch. Also on the dashboard, preferably while standing still. It's easier to press the dashboard and you'll be able to go into changing your riding mode. Then of course on the right switch cube, we now have introduced a brand new mode switch. So the mode switch allows you to quick access in one press, get to the mode you need, flick through the options and set it while on the move. So the only thing you would have to do is close the throttle, but this would also help.
Yeah, what I do is I set my favorites up and then access it through the mode button, so dead simple.
Another cool feature that we discussed with Wolfgang earlier was the addition of Sport ABS. What would the difference be between Supermoto ABS and Supermoto Plus ABS, and also the addition of Sport ABS and Street ABS? You know, you have 4 options available for a rider, and in what case would somebody use which ABS setting?
Well, that easy. I mean, Street ABS speaks for itself. It has to be absolutely as safe as it possibly can be, keeping both wheels firmly planted on the street when emergency braking. But what we found is that the Street ABS doesn't necessarily lend itself so well if we want to take it onto a track. Our test riders felt that we needed some lift up in some situations so that we didn't have the intervention of ABS happening too much on a fast approach to a very, very, very short hairpin, for instance. And the addition of Sport ABS enables the rider now to have some lift up from the rear wheel, and we have some cut when it gets a little bit higher. But the lovely part about it is that it incorporates lean angle dependent ABS. So if you're taking Supermoto and Supermoto Plus, none of those modes have got lean angle dependent ABS. So the Sport ABS kind of explains what it is. It's for riding very sportily, also with some lift up, even at the smaller lean angle. So up to 20 degrees lean angle, we also allow a little bit of rear lift up. And it works very, very well if you want to ride very aggressively on a racetrack somewhere. Supermoto Plus is quite a nice feature as well, because you get that little bit of rear slide up to 7 degrees or so if you so want. So that's more for that, let's call them a very experienced rider that knows how to do that.
For 2024 Super Duke R and Super Duke R Evo, we introduced an adjustable engine braking technology feature to the motorcycle, and there's no difference when it comes to the new GT. But why would we go and add an option to adjust engine braking?
That's a really good question. You know, we've always used our standard engine brake mode from our engine guys with this motorcycle. Well, we found that when we were cruising for long distances, as we were testing with this motorcycle, that we thought that less engine braking might work well in terms of when we're just touring. We asked, could we have 2 settings less than standard so that we could reduce it a little bit, so that we didn't have such an influence from closed throttle. So it means that we don't have to balance the throttle absolutely perfectly. Of course, we could just go into cruise control, but for the rider that prefers to have that connection to his throttle, we reduced a little bit of that engine braking just so that cruising was easier and it wasn't such a reduction in speed on motorway riding or whatever that might be. Why did we add 2 modes? So we have stronger as well, and the reason being is that we find that in some cases we actually prefer a little bit more engine braking, you know, riding very sportily or on the track, downhill riding. It's a nice thing to add for 2 people on and toggle between +1 and +2, more engine braking. So it's just more features for the customer, you know, so that he's got every option at his fingertips. As you say, now it's also on our toggle switch, like it would be with our traction control settings. I think there's about 4 options you can add on the toggle now. But yeah, that was a big added feature for us that we all agreed enhanced the ride.
And this is something super easy found on the dashboard. Everything is available through Pictogram. So everything is in a picture. The engine braking is also one of our pictograms that is focused on the dashboard. So when changing your engine braking, at one quick glance, you know exactly where you're at with your engine braking. This brings us to the end of our video in terms of the deep dive into the all-new KTM 1390 Super Duke GT. And so let's right now head to a really quick recap.